My name is Darcy Ingram, and I am 33 years old. 10 minutes before the doors opened, I was standing in the bridal suite, with my bouquet resting on my knees, like it weighed more than flowers ever should. The air smelled like hairspray and warm satin. Outside the thin wall, I could hear chairs scraping and my friends laughing too brightly, the way people do when they're trying to keep a day from tipping. The music would start. At 3:24, I was supposed to take my father's arm. He was here. I saw him in the hallway mirror when I stepped out to breathe. Navy suit, silver tie, the same cufflinks he wore to my high school graduation. He looked at me for half a second, then past me, as if the white dress was something he hadn't ordered. "I'm not doing it," he said, quietly enough that nobody else would hear. No speech, no apology, just a line delivered like a decision he'd already rehearsed. My hands didn't move, but they shook anyway. I nodded once, because begging has never changed my father's mind. In my clutch, my thumb brushed the edge of my phone case where I'd tucked 2 printed screenshots that morning, just in case I needed to remember I wasn't imagining things. Downstairs, someone else was already dressed, waiting near the side entrance, shoes polished, boutonniere pinned straight. He'd offered weeks ago, and I'd laughed then. I wasn't laughing now. At midnight, a deadline would hit that my father didn't know existed. A piece of paper with my signature would become permanent, and whatever story he planned to tell about me tomorrow would have to fit inside it. To understand why his no didn't surprise me, you have to understand how he's always said yes to someone else. People think weddings are about vows. Mine was about a story my father had been rewriting for years, right in front of me, with smiles, photographs, and careful seating charts. In public, he plays the devoted dad, the kind who hugs and prays loudly. In private, he edits me down to a footnote and calls it peace. Today, both versions of him are in the same building, and only one of them is going to speak. There's a moment coming so visible, the entire room will feel it. When someone steps forward and the script my father planned collapses. Later, when this is over, I'll ask what you would have done. But first, you need to know exactly how we got here. When I still believed he'd choose me, when I was 9, my father used to pick me up every Saturday before sunrise and take me to Lewis's diner on Route 6. He'd slide into the same cracked vinyl booth, order 2 pancakes and 1 coffee, and let me stir the cream until it made a pale swirl like a tiny storm. He always carried a grease-stained notebook from work, but he never opened it while I was across from him. That was our rule, unspoken and sacred. Saturdays were mine. After breakfast, we'd drive to his shop behind the house. He'd lift the hood of whatever neighbor's car he was fixing, hand me a flashlight, and talk me through each piece like it mattered. "See this belt?" he'd say. "It keeps everything moving. If it slips, nothing works right." Then he'd wipe his hands on a rag and tap my forehead with one finger. "Same goes for you," he'd add, smiling. "I'll always show up for you. Always." My mother had already been gone 2 years by then. Cancer took her fast. The way a storm takes a roof, loud at first, then just an empty space you keep looking up at. In my family, the wedding walk was a mother's job. My mother walked down the aisle on her father's arm, and my grandmother still kept the photo in a silver frame by the hallway phone. When I was little, I used to stand in that hallway in socks and pretend the runner rug was an aisle, dragging my finger along the frame as if I could step into it. One night when I was 13, I asked my father who would walk with me if I ever got married. We were eating spaghetti, the kind from a jar, and the kitchen light flickered every time the refrigerator kicked on. He didn't even hesitate. He set his fork down, reached across the table, and covered my hand with his. "Me," he said. "That's not a question. I'll be there. I'll always show up for you." I believed him because, back then, he did. He came to my school plays, even when I had one line. He taught me to change a tire in the rain. He sat in the front row at my first dance recital with his tie, crooked and his eyes too wet, clapping like he didn't care who saw. On my 15th birthday, he gave me my mother's pearl hairpin, the one she wore in that hallway photo. He said he'd kept it in his sock drawer so it wouldn't disappear. "Wear it when you get married," he told me. "I'll pin it in myself." I tucked it into a pouch and began believing in future like it was guaranteed. Then he remarried, and showing up became something he performed for other people. step-family optics and the slow replacement. The year I turned 16, my father brought Caroline Whitaker to Lewis's diner. He said it like he was introducing a new tool to the shop. Caroline laughed at his jokes, touched his arm when she spoke, and called me sweetheart with a bright, practiced smile. Her warmth had a radius. It covered my father completely. It reached the waitresses, the pastor's wife, the neighbors who waved from their trucks. It barely brushed me. At first, the changes were small enough to deny. A holiday dinner moved from my grandmother's house to Caroline's sister's because it's just easier. My seat at the table shifted, not dramatically. Just one chair farther from my father each year. He stopped saying my daughter and started saying, "This is Caroline." And the kids, as if I was an accessory that came with the car. Photos told the truth faster than people did. In the first one, I stood beside him, shoulders touching. In the next, I was angled to the side, half behind Caroline's daughter, Ava, who was always centered, always smiling with the confidence of someone who'd been promised a frame. By senior year, my father's living room had a new collage. Caroline and Ava at the beach. Caroline and my father at a fundraiser. Ava in a cap and gown. My picture was their tismal, from a school ID, like an afterthought slipped in to prove I existed. Caroline didn't insult me. She didn't have to. She corrected my tone in front of company. She bought Ava matching dresses with her and told me I probably wouldn't like that style. She planned vacations when I had exams and acted surprised when I couldn't come. And my father, who once missed nothing, learned to shrug. "We'll do something later," he'd say, and later would disappear. I kept my mother's pearl hairpin in a velvet pouch in my top dresser drawer. Some nights I'd take it out and run my thumb over the cool beads. Remembering my father's promise, "I'll pin it in myself." Back then, that sentence felt like a contract. Now it sounded like something he'd said to keep the kitchen quiet. When I got older, I told myself the wedding would be different. An aisle is simple. A father either shows up or he doesn't. I believed the day. I asked him what snapped him back into place for one day. The promise he makes and why I record it. Ryan proposed on a Tuesday in October, the kind of weekday that doesn't feel important until it becomes a date. You keep repeating for the rest of your life. We were at the overlook above Miller Lake, wind snapping at my coat, the water below turning with dusk. He didn't kneel dramatically. He just took my hands, looked at me like he'd already decided, and said, "Marry me." For a second, I couldn't hear anything but my own pulse. The first person I called wasn't my best friend. It wasn't my grandmother. It was my father. Because some part of me still wanted to hand him the chance to be who he used to be. I sat in my car with a ring box on my lap and dialed. He didn't pick up. Of course he didn't. Caroline had trained him out of conversations. A minute later, my phone lit up with his name. I answered so fast I almost dropped it. "Hey kiddo," he said, cheerful, like we were close and not careful. I told him. I heard him inhale, then laugh. "You're engaged," he said. "That's my girl." I waited for Caroline's voice in the background, for the TV, for the sound of him walking away. Instead, he stayed on the line. "Listen," he said, suddenly serious. "When you set a date, you tell me first. I will walk you down that aisle. I wouldn't miss it for the world. You hear me? Always. Always." The word hit like a hand on my shoulder. I didn't cry until after we hung up. Later that night he texted, "Proud of you. We'll do this right." I stared at the screen longer than I needed to. Then pressed and held until the options popped up, save pin, screenshot. I told myself it was nothing. Just a habit, like keeping receipts for returns I never make. But my thumb hesitated over the camera icon as if it already knew I'd need proof. I opened my dresser and took out my mother's pearl hairpin. For the first time in years, I let myself believe my father might actually pin it in. 2 weeks later, when I emailed him dates for a venue tour, he replied 3 days after that, "We'll see. Caroline has thoughts." And that was when wedding planning stopped. Feeling like a celebration and started. Feeling like a negotiation. Wedding planning, escalation, small cuts with big meaning. Caroline inserted herself into the wedding the way she inserted herself into my father's life. Politely, constantly, and with the confidence of someone who assumes the room is hers. At first it looked helpful. She offered a binder. She sent a list of florists. She asked for the venue address so she could take a look. Then the questions started landing like pebbles that slowly become bruises. "How many seats are you giving to our side?" she asked, as if my father and I were running opposing campaigns. When I said we were keeping it small, close friends, immediate family, she made a soft sound and said, "Well, Ava's father is coming, obviously, and my sister and her boys. They'll need front row. Your grandmother can sit just behind. It's easier for photos." Photos. Everything with Caroline came back to photos. My father, who used to call me first about everything from a leaky pipe to a new job site, became a relay. I'd text him a question about the rehearsal time, and Caroline would answer from his phone, "That doesn't work for us." I'd send a link to suits for the groomsmen and he'd leave it on red for 2 days. Then call and say he'd been busy, which meant Caroline had filled his calendar with other people's needs. He delayed the tux fitting twice. He forgot to check for the deposit until the venue coordinator emailed me in all caps about the deadline. He said he'd handle the officiant fee and then asked me, the night before it was due, if I could spot him until he moved some money around. My father has never been broke. He was just learning what it felt like to make my life wait. The smallest cut was the seating chart. When I sent the draft, Caroline called me and said, "Sweetheart, you can't put Ava behind the pillar. She'll be devastated. She's basically your sister." I stared at my laptop. Ava was 19. We were cordial in the way strangers are cordial in waiting rooms. "She can switch with Uncle Mark," Caroline continued. "And your grandmother will understand. She's old school, too. Like my grandmother wasn't the one who raised my father when his own mother died." Then came the family photos list from the photographer. Caroline had already edited it before I saw it. Group shot with my father and Caroline. Group shot with Ava. Group shot with Caroline's family. Underneath, in neat little lines, bride with dad plus Caroline plus Ava. No line for bride with dad. Just me, absorbed into their unit like a caption. I asked my father about it over the phone, trying to sound calm. He sighed as if I was asking him to move a mountain. "Caroline just wants everyone included," he said. "Let's not make it a thing." But it was a thing. It had been a thing for years. Final payments were due in 3 weeks. The rehearsal dinner headcount had to be confirmed by Friday. My venue coordinator started every email with "just checking in," and I felt the clock tightening. I kept my mother's hairpin on my nightstand where I could see it. Then my father made a request that told me this wasn't forgetfulness. It was a plan. The pre-refusal reveal: I see the plan in writing. 3 days before the rehearsal dinner, Caroline asked me to stop by my father's house to go over a few last details. Her tone was bright and careful, like she was placing something fragile on a shelf. I brought my planning binder and, without thinking, the velvet pouch that held my mother's pearl hairpin. The kitchen looked like a staging area. Clear plastic boxes lined the island, each holding a corsage with a little printed sticker. Mother of groom, grandmother Ava. One box sat apart, fuller than the rest, pinned with extra baby's breath. The label read, "Caroline." "That's new," I said, keeping my voice level. Caroline didn't glance up from her phone. "It'll look better in pictures," she answered. "And Ava needs to feel supported. This day is about blending." My father's laugh floated in from the garage. I could have walked out right then and told myself none of this mattered. Instead, I stood there, the way I've always stood there, waiting for him to step into the room and choose me without being asked. Caroline's phone buzzed. The screen lit, face up on the counter, and a notification slid down before she could flip it. Group chat, Whitaker family wedding. Participants, Caroline, Ava, and my father. Not me. The preview line was enough. "Caroline, we agreed you won't do the aisle walk if she makes it awkward. Ava deserves her moment too." A second later, my father replied, "Rick, I'll tell her before guests arrive." She calmed down. My throat tightened, but my hand stayed steady. I didn't touch the phone. I didn't ask Caroline what she meant. I simply looked past the course and noticed two neat stacks of wedding programs by the toaster. The top one was the version I had approved. The other was on thicker paper with a new cover, as if it had been rushed to print. I picked it up like I was checking the ink. Under processional, it read, "Bride escorted by Rick Frell. No father of the bride. No mention of my mother anywhere." Under special thanks, Caroline's name sat alone in a bold line. praising her for bringing our families together. So it wasn't forgetfulness. It wasn't nerves. It was choreography. I set the program back where I found it, zipped my binder, and smiled at Caroline the way she smiles at strangers in church. I'm going to make a quick call to the venue, I said, just to confirm timing. In my car, I took one slow breath, the hairpin pressed against my palm through the pouch, reminding me who was to stand beside me. I pulled the screenshots folder open on my phone and dialed Moran, the venue coordinator, because if they'd put my humiliation in writing, I needed to know what consequences could be written back. The clock starts a quiet decision with a deadline. I called Marin first, because venues run on contracts, not feelings. She listened while I described the second stack of programs and the group chat I wasn't supposed to see. Then she said, "Only the names on the event authority form can change the processional. Right now, your father is on it with you, because he paid the deposit. If you want him out, I need an updated form today." I thanked her, hung up, and sat in my car with the air conditioner blasting cold into my face. My father had always used money like leverage, quiet, steady, hard to argue with. I opened the form on my phone, removed his name, signed with my finger, and emailed it back. That protected the aisle. It didn't protect me. When my mother died, her life insurance was placed in a small trust for my education and, in her words, a wedding if she ever wants one. My father was the trustee. For years, whenever I asked for an accounting, he would say later, "Don't start drama." Caroline would add, "It's handled." Like my mother's last gift was her personal checking account. In the same parking lot, I called Jules Klein, the attorney who had filed the trust paperwork. I explained what I'd seen, what I'd saved, what I'd been told to tolerate. Jules didn't react. She just said, "If you want him to stop holding it over you, we petition the court." I drove to her office and signed a verified request for a full accounting and removal of trustee. Jules slid a blue folder toward me. "Once this is filed, he has 30 days to respond," she said. "Notice usually lands in 7 to 10 business days." She tapped the top page. "I can hold it and file at midnight Sunday. Unless you call me before then and tell me to shred it." I wanted to be wrong. I wanted my father to take my arm, pin my mother's pearls into my hair, and prove that always meant something after all. If he did, one phone call would erase this. I walked out with the folder under my arm and my chest perfectly still. Then I texted the one person I knew would show up, not for spectacle, but for safety. Even if it embarrassed my father. Someone better. The replacement is chosen family, not revenge. Uncle Mark answered on the second ring. His voice already low, like he knew I wouldn't call unless I needed something steady. "Hey," he said. "You okay?" "I need you at the venue tomorrow," I told him. "I might need you to walk me." He didn't ask why. He didn't say, "Have you talked to your dad?" He just exhaled once and said, "I'll be there." "Tell me what time." Mark is my mother's younger brother. The one who never learned how to say things prettily but always showed up anyway. After the funeral, he drove 3 hours every other weekend to take me to soccer practice. Because my father had work. Mark was the one who taught me to drive in an empty church parking lot. His big hand braced on the dash when I got scared. When I graduated, he stood in the bleachers alone with a cheap camcorder, recording like someone had to witness it. The morning of my wedding, he texted a selfie from his closet mirror. Navy suit, white shirt, tie already knotted. "Just in case," he wrote. I stared at the message until my chest stopped vibrating. He didn't need instructions. He was already dressed for a job nobody had asked him to do. At the venue, he waited by the side entrance, under a stone arch where the florist had left extra greenery. His boutonniere was pinned straight, not flashy, just a single white rose. When he saw me, he didn't widen his eyes at the dress or make a joke to break the tension. He said, "Do you want me to pin your mom's pearls?" I took the velvet pouch from my clutch and handed it over without speaking. His fingers were careful, surprisingly gentle. As if he understood that the hairpin wasn't jewelry. It was a promise that had been sitting in a drawer for too long. I didn't thank him like it was a favor. I just nodded, because he wasn't rescuing me. He was keeping me from being left alone at a doorway. Across the lobby, wedding guests drifted past us, laughing, adjusting jackets, carrying programs. Nobody noticed the substitution yet. That was the point. I wasn't looking for a scene. I was looking for certainty. Mark stood beside me like a wall, and my breathing finally matched the music. Before I let him take my arm, I walked down the hall to find my father and give him one last chance to keep his own word. The confrontation, his reason, is worse than I'm nervous. I found my father in the hotel corridor by the vending machine, smoothing his tie like he'd been born for mirrors. Caroline stood beside him in a champagne dress, holding Ava's wrist as if she might float away. When he saw me, his face tightened, not with nerves, but with the irritation of being interrupted. "Can we talk?" I asked. He glanced toward the ballroom doors. "Make it quick." The carpet smelled faintly of bleach and old perfume. Somewhere down the hall, a groomsman laughed. I kept my voice low. "Are you walking me or not?" Caroline answered first. "Rick has been under a lot of pressure today." My father's jaw worked. "It's complicated, kiddo." "It isn't," I said. "It's an aisle." He looked past me again, the way he'd learned to. "Caroline thinks it would be better if I don't. Not if you're going to. Take it personally." I blinked once. "Take what personally?" He rubbed his forehead. "Ava's been telling everyone she finally has a real family. Her dad is here. Caroline doesn't want anything that makes it look like we're choosing sides." "So you're choosing," I said, "just not mine." He flinched at that, but only enough to prove it landed. "Don't do that," he murmured. "Don't embarrass us. People are watching." "People have been watching my whole life," I said. "And even then, I didn't raise my voice. I asked you when I was 13. You said you'd be there. You said always." His eyes flicked to my clutch, like he could see the screenshots through the fabric. I didn't pull them out. I didn't need to. I knew what was written, and so did he. Caroline's grip tightened on Ava's wrist. Ava stared at the wall, performing innocence. My father lowered his voice further. "If you let me walk you, Caroline will be upset. And if she's upset, this whole day turns into drama. You don't want that, do you?" There it was, in the middle of it, my wedding reduced to a mood he had to manage. If you've ever watched someone rewrite your place in the family with a smile and call it peace, you already know how cold your body can get while your face stays calm. I nodded once. "Okay," I said, "then don't." He opened his mouth, maybe to soften it, maybe to make himself feel better. I turned before he could. As I walked back toward the suite, the music rehearsal started in the ballroom. A thin string melody that sounded like a door opening. Guests were arriving. Seats were filling. Whatever my father planned to do next, he was going to do it where witnesses couldn't pretend they missed it. Wedding day build, the set piece is staged. The ballroom at Hawthorne Manor looked like a magazine. Spread designed to make conflict feel impossible. Late afternoon light fell through tall windows onto white chairs and soft linen. Eucalyptus and roses filled the air with a clean, bittersweet scent. And somewhere near the fireplace a string trio tested, the same opening bars until the notes turned into a steady pulse. I waited behind a folding screen with my bouquet against my ribs, watching guests drift in. I used to think wedding nerves were about the vows. Now I knew they were about belonging, and who gets to decide it for you? Marin, the coordinator, moved with a clipboard and a calm face that didn't take sides. She checked her watch, adjusted a microphone, and murmured into her headset. Across the aisle, Caroline did her own version of coordinating, smiling while she repositioned people like furniture and called it helping. The front row told me everything. On my side, one place card in my handwriting read Grandma June, set beside an empty chair with no name at all. The gap sat there like an announcement nobody had to make. Across the aisle, Caroline's family had a full block of reserved seats, each card printed in matching calligraphy, each name centered. Ava's name was closest to the aisle, and her boyfriend's was beside it, as if their view mattered more than anyone who had known my mother. Someone began handing out programs at the doors. The paper was thick and cream-colored, not the version I had approved. I caught one as a guest set it down near the gift table. Under processional it read, "Bride escorted by Rick Frell." No mention of my mother. No mention of the pearl hairpin that should have been pinned by him. Not by the man waiting quietly for me now. The older programs were gone, erased like a draft that didn't fit the new story. I touched the pearls at the back of my hair to steady myself. Uncle Mark had pinned them in earlier without a joke, without a sigh. "Now she's with you," he'd said. And my throat had tightened because it sounded like truth. Caroline drifted toward the aisle with Ava at her elbow, stopping exactly where the photographer could frame them against the flowers. Ava laughed too loudly and scanned the room to see who noticed. Caroline leaned in, whispering, and my father's face softened in that practiced way he saves for audiences. He stood near the entry doors in front of a tall mirror, straightening his tie again and again, as if the knot could hold his choices together. When his eyes met mine in the reflection, his smile flickered and disappeared. In the reflection, I watched my father glance toward Caroline, waiting for her nod. He looked away and kept adjusting, pretending this was about appearance and not about me. My clutch felt heavy. Inside my phone case, 2 printed screenshots pressed against the plastic like a spare key. I wasn't ready to use it, and somewhere in town, Jules's blue folder was waiting for midnight, waiting for my decision to become a filing. I wanted to be wrong. I wanted him to take my arm and prove that always wasn't just a word he used when it was easy. Marin's voice crackled softly through her headset. 2 minutes, she said. The trio shifted into the opening melody, and the room settled into its seats. Behind me, Uncle Mark offered his arm without a word. When the doors closed, there was nowhere left for my father to hide behind politeness. I'll moment he refuses, and someone better steps in. Marin touched my elbow and whispered, "It's time." The trio found the opening notes, and the double doors in front of me eased apart. Through the seam, I saw my grandmother in the front row. Hands clenched, the empty chair beside her still blank. My father stepped into the doorway. Navy suit, silver tie, shoulders squared for the room. For one breath, I saw the dad from Louise's diner, the one who promised always. Then his eyes slid past me to Caroline. She gave a small nod. He nodded back. He leaned close. "Don't do anything dramatic," he murmured. "I'm just trying to get married," I said. His mouth tightened. "I'm not walking you," he replied. "Not like this." "Not like what?" My voice stayed quiet. My hands didn't. He chose the sentence that made it my fault. "If I walk you," he said, "it'll look like you're trying to push Caroline and Ava out. People are watching." The music kept playing. The pause between us widened until I heard someone in the front row inhale. The photographer shifted, lens lifting toward the doorway, waiting for my face to crack. My chest went hollow, but my spine stayed straight. I nodded once. "Okay," I said. I wasn't going to beg a man to keep a promise he'd already traded away. Relief flickered across my father's face. He stepped back, ready to disappear into the crowd so it would look mutual. Caroline's smile widened. Uncle Mark moved in from the side entrance before anyone could fill the space. Suit pressed boutonniere straight, eyes on mine instead of the spectators. He offered his arm like it was the most natural thing in the world. "You're not walking alone," he said, low and certain. "Not on a day like this." I slid my hand through the crook of his elbow and felt my shaking settle against his steadiness. Behind us, Marin met my eyes for a beat, then stepped aside. We crossed the threshold together, and the room changed. Heads turned in a wave. Whispers rose and died. My grandmother's face crumpled, not with surprise, but with recognition, as if she'd been waiting for the truth to show itself. At the altar, Ryan's gaze found mine and held. Near the front, my father stood rigid in the open where manners couldn't cover him. There was no explanation he could offer that wouldn't sound like exactly what it was. Someone in the second row shifted, and I heard the soft click of the photographer's shutter. 1, 2, 3, documenting the gap where my father should have been. Caroline lifted her chin, already arranging her expression for the pictures she'd show later. Ava sat with her corsage turned outward, wrists crossed, eyes darting toward my father as if waiting for his next cue. I kept my gaze forward. My bouquet smelled like crushed eucalyptus, sharp enough to cut through the sweetness in the room. And I told myself to breathe like this was normal for me now. Halfway down the aisle, I noticed the programs in guests' hands. Thick cream paper declaring, "Bride escorted by Rick Frell." The line looked ridiculous now, a printed lie being carried like scripture. My fingers brushed the pearl hairpin at the back of my head, and I remembered who pinned it in this morning, and who chose not to. At the altar, Uncle Mark slowed, then placed my hand into Ryan's with a careful gentleness that made my eyes sting. He squeezed my shoulder once and stepped back into the front row, taking the empty seat beside my grandmother. The officiant began, voice warm, words familiar. I kept my focus on Ryan's hands, on the steadiness of his breath. Beyond the flowers, Caroline kept smiling. My father stared at the floor. When Ryan and I kissed, applause rose anyway, as if the room could clap hard enough to erase what it had witnessed. As we turned to walk back up the aisle together, my phone case pressed against my palm, the screenshots tucked inside, and I thought of the blue folder waiting for midnight. My father believed he'd controlled the moment. He didn't know the clock was already running. The reception started with clinking glasses and a playlist Ryan and I had tested the week before. For 10 minutes, it almost worked. People hugged us, plates appeared, and the room pretended it hadn't watched my father step away from me at the doors. Caroline recovered first. She floated from table to table, leaning close and speaking in that soft, concerned voice. I caught phrases as she passed. Emotional day, misunderstanding. She gets overwhelmed. Ava nodded beside her, eyes wide, performing sympathy like a skill. My father headed for the microphone before dinner was served. He tapped it twice, then smiled at the crowd as if nothing had happened. I'd like to say a few words. Marin appeared at his elbow with her clipboard. I'm sorry, Mr. Frell, she said. Only the couple can authorize speeches today. The DJ lowered the music, and the quiet spread, sharp enough that nearby tables stopped chewing. His smile froze. I'm her father. Marin didn't argue. She turned the clipboard so he could see the event authority form. My signature at the bottom, his name missing. This was updated yesterday, she said. I have to follow it. A few heads turned. My grandmother's chin lifted. Uncle Mark didn't move. My father walked toward me with quick steps, anger packed tight behind his eyes. What are you doing? He hissed. I reached into my clutch and pulled out one folded screenshot. I handed it to him like a receipt. Caroline's message sat at the top. His reply sat underneath. The words looked smaller in print, but they didn't look kinder. He stared, then glanced around, as if the room had betrayed him by existing. That's private, he muttered. You made it public, I said. At the doors. Then I gave him the second envelope, the one with Jules Klein's letterhead. Inside was a courtesy copy of the petition for a trust accounting and removal of trustee, signed and ready. A sticky note on top read, file at midnight unless I call. His fingers tightened on the paper. For the first time all day, he looked scared, not of me, but of procedure. Ryan stepped closer to my side without touching me, like a boundary. Caroline arrived, breathless. Why are you attacking us? She whispered, loud enough for two nearby tables to hear. I'm not, I said. I'm choosing clarity. The photographer passed behind them, lens lowered, face unreadable. The officiant, holding coffee, looked from my father to Uncle Mark and back again, as if he finally understood the aisle. My father tried to speak, then stopped. Without the microphone, without the program he'd arranged, without his usual cover of politeness, he was just a man holding papers that didn't care what story he wanted. He walked away toward the bar, shoulders stiff, and Caroline followed, still smiling for anyone watching. I watched them go, then turned back to Ryan's hand in mine, because this was the first moment that felt like ours. Later, when the last song slowed and guests began to leave, I realized the empty chair in the front row wasn't empty anymore.